I'm living in America, and in America you're on your own. America's not a country, it's just a business.
So I'm 3 years into doing this show, and I can't really say that I've moved the needle in the public discourse all that much, but it's not going to stop me from trying. And as the year starts, I just wanted to kind of level set with the audience and talk through a few things, because there's a tension in my mind right now that I'm trying to work out. It's like there's two people in my brain that are playing tug of war on either side. So on the one side, there's the inner historian sitting in a library with elbow patches and a glass of scotch. My wife, by the way, got me a whiskey subscription for the holidays, so you'll have front row seats to my slow and steady descent into alcoholism. Anyway, that inner academic is always ready with an anecdote from history to recalibrate my anxiety over the current state of affairs. In most areas of society that those of us on the so-called left care about, the arc of history has indeed bent toward progress. Like, I think of my nonagenarian father-in-law who grew up in the Great Depression, served in World War II, had run-ins with corrupt and unsavory actors when he was building his business. He's a really fascinating guy. Today, he has an iPhone, trades stocks on the daily, and he sends me Fox News clips because he knows it gets under my skin. Or my grandmother, who recently celebrated her 100th birthday. Her husband, my mother's shitbag father, left her with 3 kids and no money in the early 1950s. And so she worked herself to the bone and sometimes had to put my mother and her 2 brothers into foster care when things got too tight. Today, she has great-great-grandchildren who were by her side when she blew out the candles. She also has an iPhone. Spend time with old people if you can. They can be rigid and stuck in their ways. Maybe they're a bit racist, overly religious, cranky, but they have a long view on the world that helps assuage some of the anger that you might feel in a particular situation or moment. Because lurking on the other side of my brain, tugging at the rope, is the progressive-minded writer and armchair warrior that knows that in America, at the very least, we have the capacity to solve so many problems. So let's take a look at some of the things that are pissing off the person tugging at the rope on the other side of my brain, like what just happened at Harvard, for example. Only 30% of university presidents are women. It's better than it was, but it's still underrepresented. The Ivy League schools were doing a little better because 6 of the 8 of them were boasting female leadership in 2023. Now that was cut to 4 by the end of the year after the disastrous hearings in Congress over anti-Semitism on campuses following the war in Gaza. Both of these women were replaced by white men as interim presidents as a way to calm the donor classes and the conservative activists who'd been fighting against these women and chalked up 2 more victories in their race to turn back the hands of time. In a recent New York Times op-ed, ousted Harvard President Claudine Gay wrote, quote, "The campaign against me was about more than one university and one leader. This was merely a single skirmish in a broader war to unravel public faith in pillars of American society. Campaigns of this kind often start with attacks on education and expertise because these are the tools that best equip communities to see through propaganda. But such campaigns don't end there. Trusted institutions of all types, from public health agencies to news organizations, will continue to fall victim to coordinated attempts to undermine their legitimacy and ruin their leaders' credibility. For the opportunists driving cynicism about our institutions, no single victory or toppled leader exhausts their zeal." End quote. 2 of the most prominent figures behind her exit are hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman and conservative activist Christopher Rufo. Now, Ackman has been vocal about his campaign to eliminate diversity initiatives from the business world and higher education. Rufo stumbled into his 15 minutes of fame as the person who brought the critical race theory framework into the mainstream lexicon. In an exchange with a New Yorker writer, Rufo gleefully characterized CRT as, quote, "the perfect villain." Its connotations are all negative to most middle-class Americans, including racial minorities who see the world as creative rather than critical, individual rather than racial, practical rather than theoretical. Strung together, the phrase critical race theory connotes hostile, academic, divisive, race-obsessed, poisonous, elitist, anti-American, end quote. Investigative writer Lee Fang recently got his hands on the 6,000-word dossier about Gay's apparent scholarly misdeeds that was circulated to the Harvard board. As usual, it reveals a well-thought-out and assiduously planned effort to discredit a woman of color in a powerful position. If you want a really erudite take on this affair, subscribe to Mark Lamont Hill's new YouTube channel. He's fast becoming my favorite political pundit and scholar. So, the conservative activists got their way once again. One step forward, one step back. Then again, the puncher in me wants to say, who gives a shit what happens at Harvard and the Harvard Corporation, right? Forget the Ivy League. People are starving. People are dying. Household debt in America is at an all-time high. Homelessness increased by 12% in 2023. See, in 2022, 580,000 people were unhoused, and last year it reached 650,000 people, according to the U.S. Department on Urban Planning and Development. Bottom up, middle out.
It's time to build our economy from the bottom up and from the middle out.
How's that going for you, Joe? Have no fear, though. I mean, after all, the markets are ripping. In fact, the S&P finished up 24% higher last year, and the Dow hit an all-time record at the end of 2023. The prospect of lower interest rates supercharged gains toward the end of the year and were so good that Elon Musk wound up back atop the leaderboard as both the richest man in the world and the biggest asshole. And Wall Street isn't done yet, as the SEC is set to approve the creation of Bitcoin ETFs so more billionaires and investor bros can capitalize on fake money gains and wealth that no one worked to create. With the Dow Jones Industrial Average hitting a peak in 2023, Mother Earth said, "Hold my beer," with the hottest year on record. These winning streaks just continue unabated. There's so much to cheer, so much winning. Fitting that COP28 was presided over by an oil baron and concluded with a clear mandate to do something about climate change somehow at some point. Now, as we're looking out across the burning planet, consider what's happening in Palestine. You have to really search for it now because if you're a consumer of mainstream media, the carnage in Gaza is so very yesterday. And we have more important things to look forward to, like the upcoming wedding between Golden Bachelor Jerry Turner and Teresa Nist. There's a huge and exciting twist in that Susan Knowles, who competed against Nist for Turner's affection, is going to be performing the ceremony. I mean, can you believe it? The 18 square miles of Gaza City is smaller than Newark, New Jersey, with twice the population. 2 million people total over 140 square miles in Gaza, 80% displaced, with 250,000 housing units damaged and 50,000 destroyed completely. 22,000 are dead as of this recording, and 77 journalists have been murdered thus far, a record. As for the fate of the now homeless and forgotten people of Gaza, not to worry, as sources revealed Benjamin Netanyahu's clandestine efforts to voluntarily migrate hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from Gaza to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, these voluntary refugees would be in good company with the more than 5.8 million displaced people in this war-torn nation. They would all join the ranks of the 5 million displaced persons in Sudan, where 42% of the population faces acute food insecurity and 6 million are on the cusp of famine. They're pretty much on their own, though, as 80% of the hospitals are out of service in Sudan, where the civil war is ravaging cities and the countryside. Now, we might start to care what happens in the DRC, however, because that's where the world's largest supply of cobalt comes from, courtesy of child labor and human trafficking. So stay tuned, because we might have to spread some democracy over there at some point. Beyond the fate of the Palestinian refugees, the war is beginning to bleed out. Rebel Houthi forces from Yemen are creating chaos in Middle Eastern shipping routes in protest of Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, and the U.S. is none too pleased about it. Israel recently bombed Lebanon, claiming to have taken out a Hamas leader. Over in Ukraine, President Zelensky announced the reduction in the conscription age from 27 to 25 in an effort to recruit an additional 500,000 soldiers. So that's happening. But again, you'll have to sift through news of the Golden Bachelor and the status of Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. And what all of this reveals in terms of the state of U.S. foreign policy is that we have none. Because we know that Americans suffer from a bizarre cocktail of overstimulation, amnesia, and a dash of who gives a shit if it's not happening to me. In lieu of policy or diplomacy, we'll just send weapons and cash and drones so Zelensky can fight to the last Ukrainian. Bibi can cleanse Gaza of all Palestinians and open up beachfront property. In fact, an Israeli real estate company thought it would be funny to create fake ads pre-selling lots in Gaza with waterfront views. Hilarious. But back to the United States. One of the highlights for me in 2023 came in the form of a YouTube debate between progressives Brianna Joy Gray on one side and now married couple crystal ball and Kyle Kulinski on the other. Now, I've talked about it before, so I won't rehash my feelings on it, but it's one of the best discussions about presidential politics because it reveals the fracture on the left. See, for many, the next election poses yet another existential threat to democracy in the United States and the planet if you consider yet 4 more years of Republican leadership on climate change and the possibility that any gains made under Biden might evaporate. Again, I've been clear that I don't see a Republican victory as the death knell for infrastructure and investment programs domestically that don't involve clean energy, at least. And even many of the clean energy initiatives are likely safe because they'll positively impact red states and counties. But we face the prospect of another Supreme Court pick, cuts to entitlements, elimination of anti-poverty programs, and maybe further tax breaks for the wealthy. But in the debate between Brianna and Kyle and Crystal, I take what Brianna's saying to heart a little more. And I know this isn't a popular take. If you watch it, you'll understand. But see, for most Americans, especially people of color, what changed? Seriously, on the ground, day to day, Trump v. Biden, what's the difference? And her point is well taken and lines up with the accelerationist wing of the Republican Party personified by Steve Bannon, but for opposite reasons. See, her point is that the Republicans will always have the upper hand even when they don't have the numbers on their side, because they'll continue to put up increasingly extreme versions of Donald Trump. So when things are terrible economically, that person will win because people vote with their wallets. But when things are mediocre to okay, they'll vote for the establishment Democrat that inches further and further to the right to placate the moderate wings of both parties. So accelerationist theory dictates that extreme versions of our darkest visions are necessary to bring the whole thing crashing down, so that we can replace our democracy with autocratic and dystopian regimes that seek to maintain white male supremacy. At least that's the right-wing version of it, right? But on the left, the idea is, let's just tear the whole establishment down so we can rebuild it with progressive values. Sort of like the same outcome, but very, very different reasons for doing it. So the far left and the far right gamble's kind of the same, right? Put it all on either black or red in the hopes of busting the house and rebuilding it in the vision that suits either side. What's astounding is how little we actually know about who's actually going to be on the ballot come November. I mean, Joe Biden is really, really old, and he probably exists on steroids and adrenaline shots to make it through the day. Donald Trump faces ballot challenges in 33 states, with 2 already invalidating his candidacy. Now, this sets up a challenge at the Supreme Court, where Clarence Thomas is among those who will rule on this matter, despite clear conflicts of interest, considering his wife supported the January 6th insurrection. But hey, at least they have a non-binding ethics reporting procedure to handle such matters internally, right? I mean, if Trump were somehow deemed ineligible, presumably surging Nikki Haley would secure the nod in the Republican primary. So as a preview of how she performs in a tight spot, she answered the super difficult question as to the cause of the Civil War in the United States, saying, quote,
I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
So somehow the very straightforward answer, slavery, eluded Nikki Haley. And this is the woman who is currently besting DeSantis as the odds-on favorite to represent the party of Lincoln if Trump doesn't make it to the ballot. But if we take a Trump-Biden rematch at face value, it's interesting to see how the candidates actually stack up in current polls, right? So assuming Trump actually does make it onto the ballot in every state and is not in prison, and that somehow doesn't impact his candidacy, here's an interesting scenario from Suffolk University. Head-to-head, Biden is polling at 43% to Trump's 44%, and that pretty much lines up along all the polling outlets that are listed on 538, right? But when you add the independent candidates to the mix, Kennedy pulls 10%, but gives Trump a 3% lead at 37 to 34. So that adds fuel to the dumpster fire that I was talking about late last year. See, I don't think that Kennedy pulls from Trump as much as he does from Biden. It's something to really watch out for. See, I think Kennedy pulls from the fringes of both sides, yes, but also has meaningful sway over African-American voters who remember that name very fondly, and some leftists that assume he's more of a radical leftist than he is a free market libertarian shill, and he is a shill. But back to the tension. The scotch-drinking academic in a comfortable library chair believes that this too shall pass. I mean, after all, most Americans have jobs. Gay people can get married. There's a supercomputer in everyone's pocket. Planes don't crash into each other in midair. Renewable energy accounts for 20% of energy production in the United States. We don't have troops deployed in combat on foreign soil at the moment. Inflation is cooling. Rates should come back down. And global population might peak in this century. Then again, the angry armchair warrior knows this, that most American jobs don't cover the cost of living, and we're sinking deeper and deeper into debt. The LGBTQ community is under assault in all corners of society as the DEI backlash deepens. That supercomputer in your pocket is causing mounting mental health crises, overloading us with information, and was constructed with child labor. There are too many planes in the air polluting the world, even if they don't crash into each other. Renewable energy is 20% of energy production, or is it renewable energy is only 20% of energy production when we need it to be a lot more? We might not have troops deployed, but we've armed the world to the teeth and are letting others destroy one another in proxy battles with no solution. And yes, inflation might be cooling, but the new normal is still more than most people can handle, with household debt at an all-time high and the homeless population growing. Declining rates will still be higher than the cost of living increases and only serve to fuel the equity markets. And after that peak of 9.7 billion people at some point in this century, some believe that the climate catastrophe will have accelerated to such an extent that there will be mass migration and even extinction from some parts of the planet. So where does that leave us on the left? What's the point of this exercise to begin 2024 as we head into this most ludicrous phase of the election cycle between the most bizarre candidates ever? Well, there's no Bernie. It's over. There's no movement. There's no progressive core coalescing around a specific vision. In fact, insiders warn that AIPAC is committed to spending upwards of $100 million to unseat progressives, and that's just in the primaries. John Fetterman recently tapped out like a bitch and declared, "I'm not a progressive." All of this adds up to some pretty difficult questions. And it really kind of starts with, what do we want? I mean, what do you want? See, we're working against dark forces that are extremely clear on what they want. Divide and conquer, keep us off balance, maintain or enhance the status quo that builds private wealth among a precious few while they burn the planet. Take away your privacy, your civil liberties, and your personal wealth. They want it all. We're at the end of neoliberalism and the birth of what Sheldon Wolin called inverted totalitarianism, where a select few pull preposterously away from the rest of us, all while telling us it's for our own good. Now, we've done a lot of work together, especially on the podcast, identifying what works and what doesn't from the past, right? Where we lost the plot and the path along the way. For example, socialist movements were attacked by the capitalist class, but the successful fighting was done between the unions and the socialists. See, the capitalists just stage the conflict and then make us fight it out among ourselves. And that particular fight revealed what most people want out of the little time that we have in this life. A steady job, a nest egg, safety, security, good health, a fair shake and a square deal. Nothing extravagant, just fairness. And in the pursuit of these things, we're stepping over fellow humans living on the street because we have bills to pay, we have kids to raise, deadlines to meet. In the pursuit of these things, we're willing to sacrifice items that are higher up on the hierarchy of needs, but just as important to the human experience, like love, art, freedom of thought, mobility, freedom to make decisions. Now, I've laid out the most aggressive editorial calendar that I've ever had for 2024. Mental health, artificial intelligence, modern economic theories, guns, cars, the U.S. Postal Service, end-of-life care, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Latin America, Haiti, Libya. I got wide eyes and a huge appetite. But every topic has to be examined through a deliberate lens with a specific goal in mind. I mean, none of these topics will resonate unless we understand how each one fits into a larger vision. Nothing we say or do will mean a goddamn thing if we fight the forces that oppress us on the battlefields of their choosing. See, they'll throw it all at you. Critical race theory, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, the Second Amendment, bodily autonomy, affirmative action. Every battle they choose is something near and dear to your heart, and they know that. And they'll stop at nothing to erase and demean you so that you remain frustrated, broke, and distracted. It's the oligarchy's sleight of hand. And here's the thing. What ails most of us is the same, no matter which side of the aisle that you're on. And that's the magic trick that they've pulled off, is to make you think that there's a difference, right? All the while, they're taking your house, your savings, your security, your mental and physical health. And these things that they take strengthen them and weaken you, compounding the gap between us and them. But there's more of us. We have the numbers. In every conversation that you have to be willing to demonize the corporate class and make them out to be the robber barons that they are. See, that's where Bernie nailed it, right? That's the playbook that resonated. And where it faltered, in my opinion, was the personal nature of it, right? Forget going after the millionaires and the billionaires. See, it's tempting to put a face and a name to it, but the cult of personality and hero worship that surrounds figures like Elon Musk and Warren Buffett and Mark Zuckerberg makes it too personal. We have to tighten the proverbial noose around the faceless zombie corporations that produce the billionaires, that hire the lobbyists, that skirt the tax code, pay the politicians, feed the political action committees, and buy the ads. And we also have to get lost in the nerdy stuff, right? We have to support public figures and platforms that take direct aim at the corporate class. The corporate tax rate during the most prosperous period in the last century was between 40 and 50%. We need that again. The tech monopolies, they got to be taken down and busted up. And trust me, it won't kill innovation, because it never does. In fact, it strengthens it. Take the lessons that we've learned from John Maynard Keynes and Joseph Schumpeter. Read the words of bloody Rosa Luxemburg. Cleave to no system, as Bakunin refused to do, and accept only genuine attempts to dismantle the corporate establishment. Infect the Democratic Party with progressive ideals. Because for every Fetterman that we lose along the way, there's a Summer Lee who's willing to fight for us. And if you want to dox somebody, forget the CEO or the billionaire or the founder. Go after the board. Support politicians that promise to legislate Citizens United into oblivion. Hell, support the bipartisan effort to rewrite the lobbying rules. Heads down, eyes forward. As much as the elbow patch persona in me knows that, yes, we've made a ton of progress, the angrier part of me refuses to lay down and let the oligarchs write the next chapter of the American story. Here's to 2024.